Imagine two people doing the exact same work. And when I say exact, I mean like literally identical.
Right.
The exact same quality of output, the same hours put in, same level of technical performance. So put yourself in the position of reviewing their work. You're looking at the data, and it's a mirror image.
Down to the last decimal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yet, when the official performance reviews come in from the wider team, one of these individuals is just universally praised. Like they're written up as this highly competent rising star or, a natural fit for leadership.
Yeah.
But the other person whose work is mathematically identical, they get evaluated as not quite fitting the culture or maybe lacking that certain unquantifiable something.
Yeah. Or needing more direction.
Yeah.
It's a dynamic that plays out in corporate offices, on factory floors, university grading systems, everyday community interactions, just every single day. And it's almost entirely invisible to the people actually perpetuating it.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today is a special edition created specifically for Empower Migra. Our mission today is to unpack some, frankly, truly groundbreaking scientific studies regarding migration, integration, and discrimination. And we're starting with that thought experiment because it just forces a very uncomfortable question right out of the gate.
It really does.
When you see this happen, like when the work is identical but the reception is completely different, are we really evaluating the performance, or does the origin, the background, the visual appearance of the person doing the work fundamentally warp our perception before the performance even registers?
Right. I mean, are we evaluating the action or are we evaluating the actor? That's the core friction we're exploring today. And it really challenges some of the most deeply held, almost, sacred assumptions our society has about fairness and meritocracy.
So to get to the bottom of this, we aren't just looking at opinion pieces. We're diving into a massive, very rigorous stack of data. We're pulling exclusively from a 2022 book titled Native Bias: Overcoming Discrimination Against Immigrants. It's written by a trio of political scientists, Danny Choi, Matthias Portner, and Nicholas Sambanis.
And what makes this source material so incredibly compelling is that they didn't just, lock themselves in a laboratory and ask college students to fill out surveys about their feelings.
Yay.
They went out into the real world. They conducted these massive field experiments across dozens of cities to test exactly how bias operates in the wild. When people have absolutely no idea they're being observed.
Which is so important because, if you hand someone a survey and ask, hey, do you treat immigrants worse than native-born citizens? Everyone's going to say no.
Exactly. It's called social desirability bias. We all want to view ourselves as fair and egalitarian. But field experiments, they strip away that conscious self-monitoring. They reveal what people actually do when they're just living their lives reacting on pure instinct.
And the instinct they're measuring revolves around this concept central to the book Native Bias. Now, you might be listening to this thinking, okay, native bias, so like racism or xenophobia. But the authors use this specific term for a reason, right? What exactly distinguishes native bias from just overt aggressive prejudice?
Right. So in the social sciences, native bias refers to something far more insidious than, say, someone shouting a slur on the street. It's the subconscious, often totally automatic tendency of native populations to evaluate people from their own in-group more positively, while simultaneously scrutinizing and judging out-groups much more harshly.
So it's not necessarily malicious.
No, it doesn't require malicious intent at all. It operates like a cognitive filter. It subtly shifts how actions, intentions, and performances are perceived based entirely on whether the person acting belongs to the us category or the them category.
So let me play devil's advocate here for a second, because there is a very common narrative that you hear in almost every HR department, every school system, every political debate.
Oh, I know the one.
Yeah, it goes something like this. I don't care where you're from, what your religion is, or what you look like. I just evaluate performance. If someone does the work, if they pull their weight and respect the rules, I respect them. It sounds like the ultimate democratic ideal. Are you saying this narrative is a myth?
Well, for most people, it's a genuinely held belief. Like, they aren't lying when they say it to you. They truly believe they are operating as completely neutral arbiters of merit. But the data from Choi, Portner, and Sambanis demonstrates that this narrative has a massive structural blind spot. You literally cannot neutrally evaluate a performance if your brain has already aggressively categorized the performer.
Right, because the brain isn't a passive video camera just, recording objective reality. It's actively interpreting. But how does that interpretation actually work? If someone says, I just evaluate performance, what is actually happening in their neural pathways when, say, a diverse candidate walks into the room?
So the source material roots this in a foundational psychological framework called social identity theory. To understand native bias, you really have to understand how human beings parse the world. We are fundamentally wired to categorize. It's an evolutionary cognitive shortcut.
Because the world is just too complex otherwise.
Exactly. You can't process every individual as a completely unique blank slate every single time you meet them. So we categorize the social world into in-groups, the groups we belong to, whether that's our nationality, our profession, our sports team, and out-groups, the groups we don't belong to.
And this isn't just a neutral filing system in our heads, right? There's a biological and emotional weight attached to those folders.
Precisely. We derive a significant portion of our own psychological self-worth from our group memberships. If my group is good, I am good. Therefore, we have this deeply vested psychological interest in seeing our in-group as superior, or at least highly competent and trustworthy. And this leads to a phenomenon the authors call parochialism.
Parochialism. Can you break that down for us in the specific context?
Sure. Parochialism essentially is in-group favoritism combined with out-group skepticism. When you categorize someone as part of your in-group, you automatically extend them the benefit of the doubt. If a native colleague makes a mistake on a spreadsheet, your brain says, oh, they must be having a busy day. You view them as an individual who made an isolated error.
Right.
But when you categorize someone as part of an outgroup, a cognitive shift occurs. You stop seeing an individual and you start seeing a representative of a category.
Okay, so it's less like wearing tinted glasses, which is the cliche people always use, and more like your brain's predictive text feature on your smartphone.
Oh, that is an excellent way to conceptualize it.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, think about your phone. You type the letters HAP, and your phone immediately autofills happy or happen based on a pre-existing algorithm of what usually comes next. It doesn't wait for you to finish typing.
Right.
What the authors are arguing is that when your brain sees an outgroup marker, say a specific skin tone or an accent or a religious garment like a hijab, it acts like that predictive text. It immediately autofills the rest of that person's personality, their competence, their values based on a societal algorithm of stereotypes before you've even had a 3-second conversation with them.
And that autofill happens in milliseconds. It minimizes their individual performance, and it maximizes the perceived differences between their group and your group. The moment you categorize someone as an immigrant or an outsider, your brain stops evaluating just their performance. Your brain starts evaluating their performance through the lens of the auto-filled stereotype you hold about their group.
But surely we can override that. Like, if I'm sitting down to review 2 identical resumes and I know about this predictive text bias, I can just turn it off, can't I?
Well, the authors point to psychological tools like the implicit association test, or IAT, to show just how incredibly difficult that actually is. They actually ran IATs on a sample of native Germans as part of their broader research framework.
For the listener who hasn't taken an IAT, how does it physically work? How does it measure something we're actively trying to hide from ourselves?
It measures reaction time. So you sit at a computer, you're asked to categorize words and images as quickly as humanly possible. An image of a native German face might pop up, and you have to press the E key for good or the I key for bad. Then an image of a hijab-wearing immigrant pops up, and you do the same. Then the test forces you to switch the associations.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you have to press the same key for native and bad, or immigrant and good.
So it completely scrambles your brain's natural wiring.
Exactly. And what it consistently reveals is that the motor pathways in the brain fire much faster when asked to associate the in-group with positive traits and the out-group with negative traits. When the native participants were forced to associate the out-group, specifically veiled immigrant women, with positive words, there was a measurable delay in their keystrokes.
Just a slight pause.
Right, we're talking about fractions of a second.
Okay.
But it's the time it takes for your conscious brain to realize your subconscious brain is making a prejudiced association and to try and suppress it.
Wow. So the hesitation is the bias.
The hesitation is the bias. The predictive text is firing, and your conscious mind is desperately hitting the backspace key. But the impulse is already there. And in real life, outside of a computer test, we don't always hit backspace.
Okay, let's drill down into what exactly the predictive text is autofilling here, because it's not just immigrant equals bad. The authors get very specific about the nature of the stereotypes applied to immigrants in Western Europe right now. They argue it's rooted in perceptions of something called ideational threat.
Yes, and this is a critical distinction in political science. For a long time, the assumption was that anti-immigrant bias was primarily driven by realistic threat.
Realistic threat meaning like they're going to take my job or they're going to drain the welfare system, economic anxiety.
Correct. The fear of competition for scarce material resources. But the data shows that realistic threat does not fully explain the depth and nature of the discrimination we see, especially toward Muslim immigrants in Europe. The primary driver, according to the authors, is ideational threat, or symbolic threat.
An ideational threat, so a threat to ideas, a threat to the invisible rules of society.
Yes. It's the profound anxiety the native population feels when they perceive that immigrants do not share their core civic values, their cultural norms, their views on gender equality, or their understanding of what constitutes a good citizen. The native population assumes, often completely falsely, that because an immigrant looks different or practices a different religion, they must fundamentally think differently and hold incompatible, even hostile values.
So a piece of clothing isn't just perceived as a piece of clothing, it's perceived as manifesto.
That is beautifully put. The hijab, for instance, has been so heavily politicized in European discourse that for many native citizens, it serves as an immediate visual trigger for ideational threat. The predictive text autofills, rejects liberal democracy, embraces patriarchal norms, refuses to integrate, even if the woman wearing it is a fourth-generation citizen who believes in all of those democratic institutions.
Okay, this is fascinating theory. We have the predictive text of social identity theory, we have the split-second hesitation of the IAT, and we have the underlying fear of ideational threat. But, I mean, you and I can sit in a studio and talk about psychology all day. The listener might still be thinking, okay, people have subconscious fears. But in the real world, when push comes to shove, people still act decently to one another if the situation demands it.
Right.
And that is exactly what Choi, Portner, and Sambonis wanted to test. They took these theories out of the lab and engineered a massive real-world collision between performance and perception. Let's get into the field experiments, because the scale of this is just staggering. They didn't just test 50 people in a university basement. They went to 30 different German cities and towns. They interacted with over 8,600 unsuspecting bystanders in public spaces.
They needed a sample size that large to achieve statistical significance and to rule out random chance. And they chose train stations and public transit hubs because these are the ultimate democratic spaces. Everyone uses them. You have people from all socioeconomic backgrounds, all ages, all political affiliations, just trying to get from point A to point B.
So I want you, the listener, to picture this scene. Put yourself on a train platform in Germany. Maybe it's Berlin. Maybe it's a smaller town in Bavaria. It's a Tuesday afternoon. You're looking at your phone, waiting for the regional express. Suddenly, about 10 feet away from you, a woman is walking briskly and she accidentally drops a grocery bag. And it's not a bag of bread. She drops oranges and lemons.
The choice of fruit is a very specific, meticulously designed element of the experiment.
Right, because you can't easily pick up oranges and lemons by yourself. Like if you drop a box of cereal, you bend over, pick it up, and you're done. But citrus fruit bounces. It rolls away in different directions. It forces a public spectacle.
Exactly. It creates a minor, perfectly calibrated social dilemma. The woman is scrambling. The fruit is rolling toward the tracks, toward other commuters. She clearly, visibly needs help. It's a completely mundane, everyday performance of vulnerability. And the authors trained actors, they call them Confederates, to perform this exact identical behavior thousands of times. The fumble, the dropped bag, the trajectory of the fruit, the awkward scramble to retrieve it. The physical action was rigorously, almost robotically standardized.
So the performance of needing help is a constant. It never changes. But the actor performing it changes. And this is where they test the predictive text.
Right. The appearance of the actor was the independent variable. They were in the exact same drop fruit scenario under 3 different conditions. In the first condition, the actor dropping the fruit was a native German woman. White, native accent, if she muttered, typical Western European appearance.
Okay, so condition 1, the native in-group.
In the second condition, the actor was an immigrant woman. Specifically, a woman with a Middle Eastern phenotype, meaning her physical features, suggested she could be from Turkey, Syria, or Lebanon. But she was dressed in standard, everyday Western clothing. Jeans, a jacket, no religious symbols whatsoever.
Condition 2, the visual outgroup, but without explicit cultural markers.
And in the third condition, it was the exact same immigrant woman from condition 2, but this time, she was wearing a hijab, a Muslim headscarf.
Now, let me pause you right there, because if I'm a skeptical researcher, I'm immediately raising my hand. I'm saying, wait, what if the native German woman was just perceived as friendlier or younger or more attractive than the immigrant woman, couldn't that skew the results? Maybe people just help attractive people more.
It's a vital question, and it's why field experiments are so difficult to design. But the researchers controlled for that brilliantly. By using the exact same woman for both the second condition in plain clothes and the third condition with a hijab, they completely controlled for physical attractiveness, age, height, and overall demeanor.
Oh, that's smart.
Right. Between condition 2 and condition 3, literally the only variable that changed was a piece of fabric on her head. They isolated the specific trigger of native bias, testing the reaction to an ethnic difference versus a religious ideational difference.
It's a trap perfectly set for the human brain. We have an identical performance of a civic need. The fruit is on the ground. The need is objective. Do we see identical reactions from the public?
Not at all. The data reveals the architecture of bias with striking, almost mathematical clarity. Let's look at the baseline. When the native German woman dropped her fruit, bystanders stepped in to help her 76.65% of the time.
Which I think we should acknowledge is actually a lovely statistic. 76% of the time, a total stranger will stop what they're doing, bend down, and help you pick up your groceries. It shows that the default social norm in this environment is good citizenship and empathy.
It establishes a very healthy baseline. It proves that the bystanders want to be helpful. Now, the critical comparison. When the immigrant woman in plain clothes dropped her fruit, the woman without the hijab, who had Middle Eastern physical features, she received help 75.27% of the time.
Wait, let me look at those numbers. 76.65% for the native, 75.27% for the immigrant without the hijab. That's a difference of about 1.4%.
Statistically speaking, it's indistinguishable. It is a null result.
That is fascinating. What does that tell us about the nature of the predictive text?
It tells us something deeply specific about the nature of bias in contemporary Germany. In this specific context of everyday, minor public interactions, simple phenotypic or ethnic differences, having darker hair, different facial features, a different skin tone, were not enough to trigger significant discriminatory behavior from the native bystanders.
Interesting.
Yeah, the visual cue of ethnicity did not automatically activate the ideational threat response. The bystanders still categorized her close enough to their in-group to extend the benefit of the doubt and offer help.
But then we get to condition 3. The exact same woman, the exact same train station, the exact same lemons rolling across the concrete, but she puts on a hijab.
Yes. For the hijab-wearing immigrant, the rate of help dropped sharply. It fell to 67.08%.
67%. That is almost a 10 percentage point drop compared to the native German woman.
It is a massive penalty. 10 out of every 100 people who would have helped a native citizen looked at a Muslim woman in the exact same distress and decided, consciously or subconsciously, to just keep walking.
And remember, the performance is identical. If we go back to our HR narrative, I just evaluate performance, this shatters it. The performance of dropping the fruit and scrambling to pick it up is the same. The quality of the vulnerability is the same. The only thing that changed was the perception of who was vulnerable. The hijab triggered a massive recategorization in the minds of the bystanders.
The predictive text fired.
Right. She went from being a fellow citizen who dropped her groceries to a representative of a culturally distant, ideationally threatening outgroup. And that categorization, triggered by a few square feet of fabric, literally cost her the baseline level of human empathy.
And if we dig deeper into the data provided by the authors, the nuances reveal even more about how environment shapes this bias. They didn't just look at Germany as a monolith, they split the data geographically, analyzing the responses in the former West Germany versus the former East Germany. And they found a stark, deeply troubling divide.
We really need to expand on this because for a listener who isn't steeped in modern German history, the difference between East and West might just seem like, lines on a map. But there are decades of profound sociological divergence here.
Let's look at the numbers first. In the former West German cities, places like Frankfurt or Cologne, the discrimination gap was about 6.5 percentage points. That means the hijab-wearing woman received 6.5% less help than the native woman. It's a significant penalty, indicating clear bias, but it's relatively moderate.
And the East.
In the former East German cities, places like Leipzig or Dresden, that gap more than doubled. It was nearly a 15 percentage point drop in help for the Muslim woman compared to the native woman.
A 15% penalty. Wow. Why is the predictive text so much more aggressive in the East? Does the book explain this?
It points directly to the intersection of history, demographics, and exposure. After World War II, West Germany actively recruited Gastarbeiter, or guest workers, primarily from Turkey, to rebuild their economy.
Sure.
Over decades, despite immense challenges, this led to a significant visible immigrant population. West Germans, simply by going about their daily lives, had more exposure to people of Middle Eastern descent.
And the East German experience under the German Democratic Republic.
It was entirely different. The GDR was heavily isolated. They had some contract workers from places like Vietnam or Mozambique, but the overall population remained highly homogeneous. Even decades after the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, the demographic makeup of the East is vastly different from the West. They have historically had far fewer immigrants.
Which creates a psychological paradox, right? Like you would think the places with the most immigrants would have the most friction.
But human psychology often works in reverse. Lack of exposure, combined with the severe economic anxiety that followed the reunification of Germany, where the East felt left behind economically, creates a fertile breeding ground for perceived threat. When you don't interact with Muslim citizens every day, your brain relies entirely on the media, political rhetoric, and societal stereotypes to build its predictive text.
Makes sense.
The ideational threat feels much larger, much more existential, because it's an abstract concept rather than a neighbor you actually know. The 15% drop is the statistical shadow of the Iron Curtain, still influencing how a stranger reacts to dropped fruit 30 years later.
Man, I am imagining our skeptical listener again. They're listening to this 15% drop, they're hearing about the fruit, and they're shaking their head. They're saying, okay, fine, people have visual biases. Dropping fruit is a silent interaction. It relies entirely on visual cues. But that's not how real integration works. Real integration is about communication. Real integration is about effort.
The listener is tapping into the foundational premise of almost all Western immigration policy.
Right. If you want to move to a new country, what's the first thing they tell you to do? Learn the language. Politicians constantly tout linguistic assimilation as the golden ticket to social cohesion. The narrative is, language is the foundation of our national identity. If you put in the grueling hours, if you learn the vocabulary, if you master the grammar, you prove your performance. You signal that you belong.
Exactly.
If a migrant puts in the performance of linguistic mastery, it has to overcome the native bias, doesn't it? It proves they aren't an ideational threat because they're literally speaking your language.
It is an incredibly logical assumption. In fact, an entire body of political science literature suggested that linguistic assimilation should drastically reduce discrimination. The authors of our source text, Choi, Portner, and Sambonis, wanted to test this exact hypothesis explicitly. So they designed a second, massive field experiment. Okay, take us back to the train station. What's the setup this time? No fruit this time. The Confederates were making phone calls. They chose public spaces where people sit and wait, train platforms, transit waiting areas. A Confederate would find a seat near a native German bystander. She'd receive a phone call and have a standardized 2-minute conversation.
What are they talking about on the phone? Is it something political?
Not at all. It was completely mundane, talking about planning a friend's birthday party. The goal was simply to be heard speaking. After the 2-minute call, the Confederate would stand up, accidentally leave a small, low-value item behind on the seat, like a small pack of tissues or a cheap notebook, and just walk away.
So the test is, does the bystander call out to her, "Excuse me, you forgot your tissues"?
Exactly. It's another minor test of civic helpfulness, but this one is preceded by an auditory performance.
And what were the variables? How did they test the language hypothesis?
They use the same 3 physical profiles: the native German woman, the immigrant woman without the hijab, and the immigrant woman with the hijab. But they added a crucial linguistic dimension. In some iterations, the immigrant Confederate spoke a foreign language on the phone, either Arabic or Turkish. In other iterations, she spoke perfect, flawless, unaccented German.
Okay, stop right there. This is the ultimate test of the I just evaluate performance narrative. The hijab-wearing woman sits down, the bystander's predictive text fires, ideational threat, outsider. But then she starts speaking flawless German. She's providing undeniable auditory proof of her integration.
Yes.
She has put in the work. She is performing linguistic mastery. The bystander's brain should hear that and say, error in predictive text. She is actually one of us. The discrimination should disappear or at least significantly decrease, right?
That is what the researchers expected. That is what the prior academic literature predicted. And that is what every language assimilation program in the world is banking on. But here is the shocking, paradigm-shifting finding of the study. Speaking perfect, fluent German did not reduce the discrimination against the hijab-wearing women at all.
Wait, I need you to repeat that. It didn't reduce it at all.
Not a single percentage point.
Okay.
The bias remained exactly the same. The native bystanders were just as likely to ignore the drop notebook and let the hijab-wearing woman walk away, regardless of whether she had just spent 2 minutes speaking flawless German or foreign Arabic.
Let that sink in for a moment if you're listening. Think about the thousands of hours, the night classes, the stress, the absolute exhaustion of learning a complex language like German as an adult. We tell migrants, integrate, learn the language, perform the civic duties, show us your performance. And they do it. They achieve native-level fluency. And the result, according to this massive field study, is a statistically precise null effect. The discrimination does not budge.
It is a devastating finding for the assimilationist narrative. The linguistic performance had zero mitigating effect on the religious and ethnic penalty. It forces us to entirely rethink what is actually driving native bias.
If it's not about an inability to communicate, what is it? Why doesn't the perfect German override the visual trigger of the hijab?
Because, as the authors explain, the native bias here isn't triggered by a perceived lack of practical skills. It's not about the friction of not being able to ask for directions. It is entirely about that ideational threat. The hijab has been so heavily burdened with symbolic meaning that it represents a clash of foundational values. When the bystander sees the hijab, that perception of a fundamental normative threat completely overrides the objective reality of the immigrant's linguistic performance.
So the brain literally ignores the audio because the visual is just screaming threat.
Exactly. The bystander's subconscious logic is, she may have learned the mechanics of our language, but the fact that she still wears that symbol means she does not share our underlying values.
Right.
The outgroup categorization holds firm, completely impenetrable to linguistic evidence.
That is a brutal psychological trap. It's a catch-22 for any marginalized group. It tells you, the listener, that even if migrants do everything the majority culture demands, they get the advanced degrees, they learn the language perfectly, they execute the exact same daily tasks flawlessly, they're still evaluated differently because the predictive text in the evaluator's brain is running on perceived value differences, not skill differences. You literally cannot conjugate your way out of being perceived as a cultural threat.
Right. And it shows the severe limitations of public policies that just focus on mechanical integration, like mandatory language classes, while ignoring the deeper subconscious biases of the native population.
Okay, I'm feeling a sense of despair here, and I imagine you, the listener, might be as well. If doing the exact same thing, dropping the fruit, doesn't yield equality, and speaking the exact same language flawlessly doesn't fix the perception, what on earth does work? Is there any performance that can shatter the predictive text? What happens when an immigrant doesn't just meet the baseline, but actually overperforms? Like, what if they actively enforce the most sacred rules of the native culture?
This brings us to the climax of the author's research, and it is a fascinating piece of behavioral engineering. They wanted to test what happens when an immigrant demonstrates active, undeniable commitment to a deeply held civic norm. So they designed what we can call the littering experiment.
Oh, this is brilliant. Because in Germany, civic order, specifically cleanliness and properly disposing of trash, is not just a polite suggestion. It is a very strong, heavily enforced social norm.
Anyone who has lived in or visited Germany knows that you do not mess around with the recycling bins or the trash on the street. It is a core component of being a good citizen. Conversely, a very common xenophobic stereotype frequently weaponized against immigrant neighborhoods is that they are dirty or disorderly. The predictive text says, immigrants don't respect our clean public spaces.
So the researchers set up a scenario that directly attacks that specific stereotype. They created a microdrama. Set the scene for us.
We're back on the busy train platforms. A native German man, another actor trained by the researchers, would walk onto the platform. He'd finished drinking from a paper coffee cup, and then, in full view of the unsuspecting bystanders, he would blatantly toss the cup onto the ground. Just blatant, arrogant littering.
A cardinal sin on a German train platform. You can almost feel the collective blood pressure of the bystanders rising. Everyone is annoyed, but usually people just glare and avoid eye contact.
Yeah. Right. It creates a very tense social atmosphere. Then, our female confederate, who, again, is either playing the role of a native German or hijab-wearing immigrant, would step into the tension. She'd walk right up to the litterer, point at the cup, and politely but very firmly scold him in German. She'd say, "Excuse me, you dropped something. Can you please throw that in the trash?"
Wow. That requires serious social courage. You are confronting a stranger in public.
It is a high-stakes social interaction. And the male actor would grumble, act slightly embarrassed, pick up the cup, and throw it in the nearby trash bin.
So let's analyze the performance here. The immigrant woman in the hijab is performing an act of incredibly high civic duty. She's not just following the rules, she is actively enforcing a native social norm upon a native citizen who is breaking it. She's basically out-Germaning the German litterer.
Exactly. She's providing undeniable, highly visible behavioral proof that she has not only learned the values of the host society, but she's willing to defend them. She is directly confronting the ideational threat stereotype. Now, the trap is set. A few moments after this confrontation, this same woman who just enforced the norm walks down the platform and accidentally drops her bag of oranges and lemons.
We are back to the fruit. The ultimate test of empathy. Does the bystander, who just watched her heroically stand up for German cleanliness, actually help her pick up the fruit?
The results of this good citizenship display were profoundly revealing. When the hijab-wearing immigrant enforced the anti-littering norm, native bystanders did reward her. They helped her at a significantly higher rate than they helped the hijab-wearing immigrant who simply stood by silently and ignored the litterer.
Okay, a breakthrough. So performance can move the needle. What is happening in the brain of the bystander here? Why did the scolding work when the perfect German language failed?
Because confronting the litterer provided what psychologists call stereotype-defying behavior that directly addressed the core fear. Speaking German just meant she learned a skill. Enforcing the trash rule proved she shared a value. It shattered the predictive text. The authors found through their analysis that the bystanders who witnessed this actually recategorized her.
Recategorized, like they moved her from the out-group folder to the in-group folder.
Yes, they stopped seeing her purely through the lens of a Muslim immigrant and started seeing her through a new, temporary lens, a fellow upstanding citizen who cares about our community. The shared civic norm created a new, common in-group that briefly superseded the visual out-group marker of the hijab.
That is genuinely inspiring. It shows that human beings are capable of updating their mental software when presented with overwhelming evidence. But I know there's a catch. The tone of the study doesn't end on a triumphant note. We need to look at the double standard, because she wasn't just compared to her past self. She was compared to a native German woman who did the exact same thing.
This is the critical, crushing caveat of the entire book. Yes, the hijab-wearing immigrant's performance of civic duty improved her standing, got her more help. However, she still received 11 percentage points less help than a native German woman who performed the exact same norm enforcement.
I want to make absolutely sure you, the listener, are hearing the math on this. Let's walk through it. Scenario A. A native German woman scolds the litterer, drops her fruit, and gets a massive outpouring of help from the crowd. Scenario B. The Muslim immigrant scolds the litterer, exhibiting the exact same high-level civic performance, taking the exact same social risk, drops her fruit, gets more help than she used to, but still lags 11 points behind the native woman.
That is exactly what the data shows.
Yeah.
And this is the absolute climax of our whole discussion about the illusion of meritocracy. The immigrant has to work significantly harder. She has to perform a highly demanding and potentially risky social act just to get closer to the baseline level of respect that is automatically, effortlessly afforded to the native German who literally does nothing.
It breaks the entire "I just evaluate performance" narrative wide open. Think about the prompt we started with. Do we evaluate performance objectively, or does origin play a bigger role than we think? If only performance counts, it is mathematically impossible for identical performance, especially an extraordinary performance like confronting a litterer, to yield such stubbornly unequal rewards. It is definitively a perception problem, not a performance problem.
The penalty of the outgroup categorization is so incredibly heavy that even heroic civic behavior cannot fully erase it. It mitigates the bias, yes, but it does not level the playing field. The native population requires overwhelming, constant proof of assimilation, and even when that proof is provided in the most undeniable way, a native premium remains. The goalposts are fundamentally unequal.
We need to slow down for a second because we really need to turn this directly to you. We've been talking about train stations in Germany and dropped lemons and complex field experiments, but I want you to bring this into your own life. Bring this to your office. Bring this to your desk.
The implications of these findings are pervasive across every sector of society.
Think about the last time you were hiring for a position. You have two identical resumes on your desk. The same university, same years of experience, the same exact software certifications. Are you really truly sure you are deciding neutrally? When you see two colleagues give the exact same presentation, same slide deck, same data analysis, same delivery, How much of your objective evaluation is actually your brain's predictive text firing a native bias? Are you demanding that the colleague from a minority background perform at 120%, confronting the metaphorical litterer just to be viewed as equal to the native colleague who is comfortably coasting at 90%?
It is a deeply uncomfortable reflection because our brains are evolutionarily designed to hide this bias from our conscious minds. The bystanders on those train platforms in East and West Germany didn't wake up and think, oh, I am going to actively discriminate against a Muslim woman today. They simply saw a woman drop fruit and they felt less motivated to help. They felt less of a connection. They felt she was somehow less deserving of their time. And they probably justified it to themselves by saying, I'm just in a rush today.
Yeah, they masked the bias with a perfectly rational excuse.
Exactly. And if we extrapolate this out, if we look at the sheer scale of the data, we have to ask a terrifying question. How many opportunities are denied? How many promotions are delayed? How many brilliant ideas are ignored in a meeting room? And how much human potential is lost in our society without anyone, not the victim and not the perpetrator, even realizing why it happened?
How many times has someone been pulled into a manager's office and told they aren't a good culture fit when the mathematical reality is that their objective performance was stellar, but they simply couldn't overcome the invisible penalty of the evaluator's predictive text? The cost of this native bias isn't just a dropped orange on a train platform. The cost is systemic, structural inequality that successfully masquerades as a pure meritocracy.
Which brings us to a final paradigm shift for you to mull over. In public debates and political campaigns and in media narratives all over the world, our society is obsessed with asking one specific question. Do migrants perform well enough to integrate? We endlessly debate their language skills. We scrutinize their job readiness. We analyze their test scores.
Right. We put the entire burden of proof, the entire weight of integration squarely on their shoulders. We demand they fix the problem of our perception.
Exactly. But building on the overwhelming empirical evidence from Choi, Portner, and Sambani's today, the actual question we must ask ourselves when we look in the mirror is very different. We need to stop asking if they are performing enough and start asking, why is their identical performance automatically perceived as lesser, and how do we fix our own lenses? Because until we address the deeply ingrained bias in the evaluator, no amount of flawless performance by the evaluated will ever be enough.
That is the real work. And here's something else for you to consider as you leave this deep dive. If human evaluators are so hopelessly compromised by this subconscious native bias, what happens as we hand more and more of these evaluations, resume screening, loan approvals, university admissions over to artificial intelligence? We like to think a computer will fix the bias. But if these algorithms are trained on decades of human data, data where identical performance was judged unequally, are we actually removing the bias? Or are we just hard-coding our own prejudiced predictive text into silicon, scaling this discrimination to a speed and efficiency we've never seen before?
It's a profound question, and one that really highlights how urgent it is that we understand the mechanics of our own perception.
The problem isn't the ink on the essay. The problem is the mechanism by which we read it. That was a deep dive for Empower Migra. Empower Migra understanding begins with listening.